The summertime is perfect for camping, whether you're with friends or even by yourself. However, I do recommend that, regardless of the company you're with or the lack thereof, to always bring a firearm. People always forget that when we are in the woods, that we are nature's guests. We are in the wild. Many things still lurk in the depths of the solidarity of the thick trees and the undiscovered lands. There will be a time that you might unknowingly venture too deep, or worse, camp at a distance in which the horrors of the old world come crawling ever so silently to remind us that we are never truly alone in the woods. My story takes place 13 years ago in northern Michigan during the late summer. When I go camping normally, I bring a camping trailer which normally contains multiple firearms. But as luck would have it that year, my trailer had grown black mold from the year prior, and I was forced to deep clean the trailer in order to camp in it. This forced me to remove all my camping gear, including a couple of my guns, and hire a cleaning service to chemically remove the mold. Seeing how I had a few things on my mind already, when I replaced my gear, I totally forgot to replace my guns. Thankfully, I always conceal carry regardless, but that will come into play later. So my camping trailer finally gets cleaned, and I decide to go on a small camping trip to break it in. Normally I go much earlier in the year, but things at work made it hard for me to get time off to do so. Now that the busy season at my job was over, and my camper was disinfected, I was now ready to go out into nature. Fun fact about me, I have a small blog where I write about cryptids and other scary things that lurk in the woods, with a decent-sized following online. I make about $50 or so each month, which obviously is not a lot, but it's a fun hobby that lets me make some money on the side. I have been working on compiling information about the Michigan Dogman, which is supposed to live in the northern peninsula of Michigan. A place I'm not too terribly familiar with, yet a destination I have been wanting to go for some time to specifically investigate. I have a cousin in the police force up there, and he can confirm to a degree that something is indeed happening to the campers or people living in the outskirts near the woods. He told me that last year 7 people were found dead at a campsite named Clear Creek Campgrounds. The year before that, 3 people went missing for a few months before their remains were found, about a mile into the woods, at the same campgrounds. He told me that the police are anticipating more disappearances and deaths, but what could they really do against nature? My cousin said that the police do not think it was a dogman or anything, but I still think that these events are lining up to something more sinister than just wildlife getting out of hand. I went ahead and reserved a camp spot at Clear Creek Campgrounds to hook up my camper to and stay a night. I had brought a camera and my laptop to do an investigation and hopefully make some kind of discovery. I got off work early on Friday and drove up to the northern peninsula while listening to books on tape. The campgrounds were in surprisingly poor condition. It was quite obvious that most people knew this since there wasn't that many people staying there, despite it still being the peak season. I did see a handful of campers a sight or two over that looked to be younger. Unfortunately for me, they were taking advantage of the unpopulated campgrounds and were playing music and being very loud. I was slightly annoyed, but I didn't want to live up to the stereotypical old angry man, telling the young people to turn off that racket. My setup was quite easy. I parked the camper, got it hooked up, and started my professional investigation of the Michigan Dogman. I went outside and hiked around a bit to see if there were any signs of any type of creatures living in the woods, any deer or anything a large predator could feast on. A few hours passed and I noticed that some trails leading deeper into the woods were next to mine, but before I went down them, I thought it would be best to use the restroom back in my camper. I hiked back to see an old tow truck parked in front of my camper. Interesting. I walked back and a grisly-looking man stepped out of the truck and introduced himself as the camp director. "Oh, hello," I responded. He asked how I was doing and asked if the campers a few sites over were being too loud, and I mentioned that they kinda were. He nodded and pointed to my video camera I had around my neck. "What's going on with this?" he asked inquisitively. "Oh yeah, this is, I'm investigating cryptids in the woods for my blog." "Oh, really? How fascinating." The camp director began to look at me with a weird look. Not a threatening look, but more like he was a bit too interested in that. "Have you found anything?" he asked. No, not really. To be honest, I just started my investigation today, and I got nothing. Maybe I can come with you. I know this great place you might find some evidence. I told him that I'd love to do that, but I had to go back inside from being in the woods for a couple of hours. But I'd love to take him up on that later in the future. Sure thing, he said while smiling and handing me a business card. He then got back into his tow truck and drove over to the next campsite. I went inside my camper and went to the restroom. While inside, I began to hear shouting coming from outside. It sounded like the campers were not taking the request to be quiet very well. The shouting eventually stopped and the camp director drove off. Right when he did, however, the music went right back to the original volume. Wow. It started to get dark rather quickly after that. I meant to go back out into the forest and do some more investigating. However, my stomach had other ideas. I decided to stay back and cook up some hot dogs, had a few beers, and by the time I was finished, it was practically nighttime. Oh well, there's always tomorrow. I did my best to relax and work on an article of my up-to-date investigation when I noticed that the music from outside had stopped. Well, about time, I said to myself. I glanced over to my wristwatch to see that it was 9:30. Quiet hour wasn't until 10, and I didn't even think that that would have stopped the campsite next door from being quiet, but here we were. After a minute or two, the music went back to the original volume, as if nothing had happened. I was annoyed but didn't care enough to do anything about it. About 30 minutes later, the same thing happened. The music went off. At this point, I was tired and started my evening routine to go to bed. I took out my contacts and started brushing my teeth. Luckily, I brought earplugs just for the scenario, just like this. As I was brushing my teeth, I began to hear screaming. The screaming was clearly coming from the campsite with the music. I stopped brushing my teeth to get a better listen to what was happening, and before I could make my way over to the window to peer out at the campsite, the screaming also went quiet. I looked out the window and could see that the shadows were being casted from the moderately large fire that was now unattended. I looked around my camper for a firearm to conceal, but then realized that the only one I had was still in my backpack. I grabbed my pistol, racked one in the chamber, and put it inside my hoodie in my front pocket. My contacts were out since I was just about to go to bed, but I had glasses on, which still got the job done. The brief walk over to the campsite revealed many things. The first thing I noticed was the sheer amount of alcohol just laying around. The campsite had about 3 or 4 tents, but no one was here. I then noticed dark stains on the tent and part of the grass that they were camping on. I then realized that I haven't given much thought to coming over here since I had forgotten to bring a flashlight. Looking back, this was probably a good thing. I had realized my mistake and went back to my camper. Once I was back inside, out of habit, I locked the door behind me. I began searching for a flashlight when I heard rattling at my door. It was the door handle to my camper. "What?" I whispered to myself. "Who's there?" I shouted. No response. I grabbed my pistol out from my hoodie and pointed it at the door. I slowly walked over and peered out the window to see who was at my door. Outside was a woman who looked completely distraught. However, she was trying her best to be discreet, as if she was trying not to draw attention to herself. I tiptoed over to the door and flung it open in hopes to catch the woman in this act of trying to break into my camper. However, the surprise was mine, as I opened to see that this woman trying to gain entry was covered in blood. She screamed as I clearly startled her, and I did the same. I could see that she was holding her torso that was stained a dark color, which I assumed to be her blood. "Please, it's out here," she said with a terrified and painful look on her face. I had seen enough things in my life to know that something wasn't right. My first thought was that this was a thieving technique. Play a victim of some kind of accident and let a stranger in your house. Next thing you know that they're trying to kill you. I stood there in shock while holding my pistol at the woman who was screaming at me to let her in. Before I could say anything, the woman came rushing in at me. I froze. Normally I would have shot her, but I was so confused at the situation. She rushed in and onto the floor. "What are you doing?" I shouted at her. Before she could give a reply, a large feral beast reached inside my camper, grabbed the woman by the leg, and began to drag her outside. This time I didn't hesitate and began firing at the creature, attacking the woman. The shots didn't kill the creature, but it did seem to hurt her, as it let her go, only dragging her halfway outside. Around this time I was now out of ammo. The woman laid in the doorway, preventing me from being able to close the door. The creature halted the attack, but only for a few seconds, as it then realized I was out of ammo. I tried to help the woman back inside, but the creature came back. The creature was incredibly strong. I stood no chance trying to help this poor woman as the creature violently ripped her from my grasp. I fell back hard, hitting my side on the sharp corner of the table that sat in my camper. It knocked the air out of me, and I felt a sharp pain coming from my side. I put my hand on the wound, and I could feel a warm liquid painfully flowing from the wound. It took me a few seconds to get my breath back in order to breathe. Thankfully, the creature seemed to be preoccupied with its current meal, that it left me alone for the time being. When I could finally breathe again, I stumbled to my feet and staggered to the door. I felt like at any moment that the creature was going to come and attack me, while I was in my most vulnerable state. I closed the door, but before I could lock it, I felt a hard bang on the other side. Something grabbed the handle, which prevented me from locking the door. I pressed all my weight against the door, but it didn't even matter. The creature was able to force an arm in like I wasn't even standing there. I grabbed the closest thing to me, which just so happened to be an old hatchet that still had a leather cover on it. Not thinking, I just started to swing with the covered hatchet at the arm in hopes that it would do damage to the creature, enough for it to at least retreat. But the hairy arm continued its assault. I think after a dozen or so hits, the leather cover fell off and I was able to hit the arm with the actual hatchet. I could tell immediately that it did damage, and part of the arm began to bleed. I pressed on the door more and swung even harder, which began to remove decent-sized chunks from the creature's arm. The creature tried to remove its arm, but with the pressure of the door on it, it was not able to do so. After a flurry of swings, I was able to close the door. The creature's arm was now fully severed and was still bleeding on my floor. I closed the door and locked it, and tried to get my breath back. The pain in my side as well as the intense swinging had rendered me exhausted. When I was able to catch my breath, the first thing I did was call the police. They sent out a squad, which unfortunately didn't have my cousin there, but he was my second call, and he arrived not much later. I kept the door locked until I knew for certain that it was the police. I made sure to keep the arm of the creature as proof of what had happened. At first, the police sat me down and asked me what had happened. I told them and showed them the arm. I could tell that they didn't believe me, but the arm that I had completely baffled them. Around this time, my cousin showed up, in normal clothes, and I filled him in with what had happened. His reaction was similar to the other police, as he clearly knew that he was out of his element on this one. I wish I could tell you that they closed down the camp, and that they all believed me. I wish that I could tell you that this event got national headlines in every newspaper and every news station across the world, but that never happened. I got carted off to the hospital, and thankfully my cousin backed me up, and I was removed as a suspect of the killings of the campers next to me. I don't even think they filed this event as a case of any kind. As for me and my investigation, I felt that I encountered something that I wasn't meant to see. I want to say it was a dogman or a Bigfoot, but it all happened so fast and it was so dark. I didn't get a great look at the creature, let alone the woman that had entered my camper. Events like this can be incredibly difficult to remember in intense detail. The arm of the creature was taken by the police, and I never saw it again. I considered going back there a few months later to follow up with the police, but I was told that I should just let it go. That was for my sake. Something I did find odd that jogged my memory was the business card of the camp director that wanted to show me something about the campgrounds to help with my investigation. I tried calling a few times, but he never answered. I always wondered, even to this day, what he was going to show me before the attacks on those campers. Perhaps it was some secret trail that led to a hidden cave where a dogman lived, or something. Maybe it was a cool rock formation that was out on a trail somewhere. Or maybe he was going to show me something that was related to those attacks on those campers. I guess that will always be something that I will never know.